like Ghana should see a paper on the world we want now before we draft a paper on the Ghana we want now?
Thank you. I liked Madam Lucy's intervention. And you are right, Madam Lucy, about we should not let this, the SDGs agenda, drive us into a situation where this is about ticking the boxes. Have we done X, Y, Z? And you're absolutely right. We need to have an honest conversation with ourselves as African nations and African people about what it is that we need to do to reduce poverty and to get our people out of the life of indignity that they live. We need to have an honest conversation about why 700,000, close to 1 million children, Ghanaian boys and girls, are either not going to school or have dropped out of school. We need to have an honest conversation about why is it that we cannot have access to decent health care. That conversation is not a UN conversation. That conversation is a conversation that we need to have with ourselves. But one of the things that the SDGs does for us, it gives us a sort of framework and a reference point and says, you come together. One of the things, and Madam Christine, the res rep for the UN, talked about it very well. The 1 P of the 5 Ps is about partnerships. We need to have a lot of these conversations with ourselves, with government sitting in there, with the private sector and the leaders of industry, and civil society NGOs sitting there, have these conversations. Yesterday, as we were sitting here, I also ran because the Chamber of Commerce was talking exactly about the one district and one factory. They were completely surprised when I got up to speak, and as an NGO, I was talking about we want to work with a cooperative of 350 women up north to create a factory that will be owned by this group of women. And my organization, Care International, is willing to put in there $500,000 US, and we are looking for people to work with. We are looking for people to go into a joint venture with us, but we want a factory that is going to contribute towards this agenda of one factory, one district, but is also going to be squarely about reducing poverty in a particular community and putting the people in that community at the center of that process of removing poverty. Poverty is not something that you can remove for people. You can't sort out the poverty issue without the people. Absolutely. And that's why it is important that as we begin this process, and I'm happy Martin has talked about, we need to localize this agenda. Exactly. And that's part of what you are raising, Madam Lucy. Let's localize this. What does this mean to us? What does this mean? When we worked with the UN, we went out a few weeks ago to just even communicate in local languages. What does this SDG? Too much English. Can we talk about SDGs in local languages? And so we are doing exactly that in partnership with the United Nations. We are developing communication materials that are going to enable us to take this message to the community. The people must take this responsibility of removing poverty and dealing with this, addressing these goals first and foremost. The rest of us, really, at the end of the day, are going to be just bystanders. But I want to just say one thing about the issue of the diaspora. I had the privilege of serving my country, Kenya, as ambassador in Washington. And so I had a lot of time to visit with not just the Kenyan diaspora in the US, but the African diaspora, because we had an African group, an African ambassadors group in Washington. And I chaired that group my last year in 2012, 2013. So we had a chance to meet with the African diaspora in the United States. And I can tell you, without any fear of contradiction, that we have some incredible resources outside of this continent. Our people, who absolutely, we must find a way to make them a part of the solution. Incredible people. I had traveled to 30 states in my 3 years in the US. Everywhere I went, I found Kenyans and Ghanaians who are deans of schools, heads of particular departments, doing incredible things, innovation, scientists, sociologists, engineers, you name it, doctors. I was in a meeting one day with African doctors in the United States. In one room, we had 50 oncologists, 50. Do you know how many oncologists, cancer specialists, we have in sub-Saharan Africa, in our public facilities? 50. We had 50 of them in one room, in one day, in a meeting with a group of African doctors. Just think of what is available there. So I agree with you completely, my brother, that the diaspora needs to be a part of this, and I'm very happy that the diaspora is beginning.
Well, diaspora question came from there.
Yeah, and also the young lady there.
The young lady.
Fatima, which of the questions are you answering? We've got one on diaspora, information sharing.
I have my fellow Kenyans sitting with me on the same podium, so we probably speak the same language, because coming in from East Africa and seeing West Africa, poverty for me, and I keep maintaining this, is a mindset and an attitude issue. Because development is about moving forward from the past. And if we look at our history as Africans, we had our chickens in the backyard, we had our cows to milk, but today Ghana is a 98% import-based country of chicken. What happened? Did we develop backwards or did we develop forward? It's a mindset issue, because we're having a migration that's happening from the rural to the urban. Everybody's chasing for the same share of pocket and CD, where, again, I'm reiterating, who is going to work back in the rural, and that's where the linkage comes into the diaspora. The diaspora is key, because they have been exposed to what's happening in the first world. Technology is so key. If we're able, with the diaspora coming in next month in the July conference, find out ways of how we can make the first world technology work with our rural community, and bring that to come in and tie in on the front of engaging the youth, because that's where they don't need degrees to be able to become technology savvy, then I'm sure it can work.
There was also a comment about community interest versus national interest, where he made mention of the capital inflows. Lawyer Buchi, you just take that one for me quickly. He was pitching community interest against national interest as far as, achieving the SDGs are concerned.
Well, first of all, there's not supposed to be a dichotomy in principle between community interest and national interest, because a community is part of the nation. So if there's a sinking of national interest and community interest, there wouldn't be this conflict. The reason there is because communities often see themselves as being exploited by the nation. Resources are taken from where they are, and they are not taken in a sustainable manner. The Galamsey is an example. And so we extract resources, we harvest natural resources without due regard to the environment within which the community lives, and therefore invariably we end up destroying their means of livelihood and destroy the very essence of their lives. And that's why there's often that conflict. But as we end, if I can just chip this in very quickly, the principles contained in the SDGs are all in the Constitution. That's the interesting part. If you open to the directive principles of state policy, which was adopted in 1992, virtually every principle is there. And if I give you the 3 examples, the free compulsory universal education is in there. The protection of the environment is in there. And the issue of poverty reduction is in there, among others. So these have been with us from day one. The difference is that there have been a series of policy failures and the lack of commitment and the political short-termism I referred to earlier. And I think, therefore, that I would only continue to support the SDGs to the extent that they provide an external accountability model. Internally, government can refuse or fail to do it. But externally, governments want to be seen to be respecting international principles, and if the SDGs have become part of the broad international principles, every government will want to say, including the government of Ghana, that will respect it. To that extent, I will support it. But in reality, they have been with us since 1992, long before the MDGs and the SDGs.
In other words, we cannot necessarily say it's not binding on us.
It is binding. You can actually go to court. In fact, in the decision of the court, initially it was not binding. It was not binding because the court said it was too broad. But the Supreme Court has reversed itself in a recent decision. And so now you can actually go to the Supreme Court and sue for a violation of the right to health. And it's contained in there. For a violation on the right to education. All these are in there. The Ghana Constitution is a beautiful model Of course, the difficulty is people do not want to go through the process of litigation, but the reality is we can enforce them in court.
I know it's time for us to go, but in terms of it being binding on us, I was referring to the SDGs. Now, you made mention of the fact that it is already in our constitution as a people, but there are those who have argued that, look, the SDGs are not exactly binding on us.
They are binding on us, and that's because they haven't seen it. You don't have to call it SDGs. If you show up in the Supreme Court, you don't have to mention SDGs because the court doesn't know what it is. I mean, I'm not saying the court doesn't know, but doesn't recognize the SDGs.
It.
But you have to mention, for example, a violation of your right to education. If you mention a violation of your right to education, it is in there. If you're able to demonstrate the fact that government has the means and has not sustainably applied resources, government can be held accountable and an injunctive relief will be issued against government. So it is in there, and all these are in there. If we are committed to that, we can actually hold government accountable and get the SDGs implemented in Ghana. I suspect Ghana is one of the countries, by reason of our constitutional model, where the SDGs can actually be achieved through litigation.
Paulo, 30 seconds and then we wrap it up.
Totally agree. Yes.
Before I'm deported by the presenter, I better be fast. I wanted to say that the point that Lucy raised and the other gentleman, I think is actually a very valid point. I think we need to recognize that Africa has been shortchanged by the international community, that the skepticism that Africa express towards the international agenda is actually justified. You can ask yourself, 50 years of IMF policies, World Bank intervention, UN intervention, what have you done for us? And I'm not saying that that is right or wrong, but I'm saying that that has to be recognized. It's like if you've been going to a doctor for 50 years, they keep giving a nice medicine and you keep getting worse and worse and worse. Aren't you going to ask yourself, is this doctor a good one? Should I change him or her? Should I just figure out whether the recipe they give me is because they want to sell medicines or not? We shouldn't be defensive. I think when we're defensive, we undermine our own cause. The international community needs to do better for Africa, but I also want to challenge business people like you to keep your own negotiators, to go and sit at this meeting and have a stronger voice. I went to negotiations on the Climate Change Convention. The US delegation, I don't even know how many people were in the room, but they took 2 buses to bring them all in there. The Ghanaian delegation was 3 people. 3 people that had not very much to contribute, not because they don't have, but because they're responsible for climate change, marine pollution, you name it. So work with them, work with your own governments, make sure that the agenda that we have is the agenda that you want, and criticize the international community when they don't deliver. I think it's very important that these voices are heard, and we shouldn't shy away from saying, bring it on so that we do a better job.
I told you it was a powerful pack. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. It's apparent that we have been shortchanged as a continent. It's time we took our destiny into our own hands, and perhaps it'll be easier if we don't classify them as SDGs. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for our moderator, Kemini Amano, and a very amazing panelists. Now, when you see the SDGs up there, it just tells you that the more things change, the more they remain the same. This is in virtually every constitution of the world, I believe. So why is it that we can't enforce? But central to this argument, thank you. Rebranding, same thing. But ladies and gentlemen, as we still deliberate on this, one thing is apparent, is the result of a global dialogue. And so as African governments especially prepare to implement these or start implementing these things, one thing is for sure, African governments will have to dig deep to make available their own resources because guess what? Donor funding ain't going to happen anytime soon. I talked with this friend of mine, and ladies and gentlemen, he's praying very seriously. Let's see what his prayer is about right now. He says, thank you, Lord, for this wall that keeps the Mexicans from Israel. Help me build another one to keep them from the US. So you understand where the donor funds are going to go. Ladies and gentlemen, speaking to us on the much-awaited theme, the impact of Brexit in Africa, after which we shall delve into the man Trump himself. It gives me great joy to call up here a trained lawyer, a businessman, a politician, and a diplomat, Mr. Kwame Jantua. Does this work?
Thank you. Good afternoon. Sometimes it can be a difficult thing when you're the last speaker and everybody's hungry and they have to go for lunch. But I will try as much as possible to make it more exciting for you as to what I'm going to say. I'm going to start, and I must say, the presentation by David this morning was crack and was good, and it kind of dovetails into my presentation. So I'm going to start by taking a taxi to the Minister of Finance to give us a nutshell of what our position is economically. Then I'll take a trip to Brexit Britain, take a fast train to China, and come back here with a driverless Uber. And that driverless Uber, when it comes, I'm going to have a conversation with the CEOs in this building. The post-colonial era witnessed a consolidation of the country's economy, and this provided a substantial increase in the standard of living of a multitude of Ghanaians. And this could be seen in strong economic growth, which contributed in reducing Ghana's poverty rate from 52.6% of the population in 1991 to 24.2% in 2002, according to a World Bank study. Assessing the overall picture, the huge reliance on natural resources has to a large extent unwritten these improvements. And in evaluating the state of the economy generally, Ghana is the second biggest producer of gold in Africa and a major exporter of both cocoa and crude petroleum, which has served the economy very well. Strides have been made in the last 10 to 15 years to encourage development in other potential sectors of the economy, with some degree of success. Transportation, construction, telecommunications, road infrastructure have seen growth, and the potential of agribusiness seems to be given a real boost by this new government, making it the center of their transformation of the Ghanaian economy. Again, for a while now, the service sector has been seen to be the strongest performing sector of the economy, growing by 5.7% and accounting for 54.4% of GDP in 2015, as compared to 51.9% in 2014, followed by agriculture and to some degree industry, which also showed growth of 2.4% and 1.2% respectively in 2015. Non-oil GDP experienced growth up to 4.1% in 2015, compared to 3.9% in 2014. But unfortunately, a reduction in commodity prices worldwide, combined with under par management of public finances, left no option for government but to seek assistance from the IMF by negotiating a 3-year extended credit facility worth $918 million in April 2015. The discovery of oil and gas, bumper crops of cocoa, and an influx of new investment have sustained a robust GDP expansion in Ghana over the last decade. However, the economy has taken a tumble in these latter years, caused by some factors that have been beyond us. Others we have created, and some of these hurdles can be itemized as follows. a drop in export commodity revenues, a depreciating currency, a widening fiscal deficit, the dreaded power outages known disaffectionately as doomsor over the past 4 years, and an under-power management of public finances, to mention but a few, which has resulted in an economic slowdown and a change in government. Nonetheless, it seems the country's fundamentals, such as a developed private sector, political stability, transparent regulatory and legislative frameworks, as well as a wealth of natural resources, continue to make the country attractive to do business and still holds an interest for investors. Again, although Ghana has had to apply to the IMF for a credit facility, the government is heeding to the process with the objective of laying the groundwork for future sustained growth going forward in Ghana's economy. And this is evident by the fact that the IMF estimated a 3.3% increase in GDP for 2016, weighed against a projected 3.9% in 2015 and a leap of 7.4% in 2017. Consequently, regardless of the uncertainty in Ghana's economy, many, including the business and international communities, are of the opinion that the country is on the right trajectory. So, with this backdrop of Ghana's situation, the million cedi question is, where and how does Brexit in the UK, the election of President Trump in America, and the Chinese marauding financial juggernaut impact on Africa and Ghana's private sector? I am absolutely certain that most of you here, and if not all of you, witnessed the unfolding of those two major political events last year, Brexit in the UK and the election of Donald James Trump as America's 46th president, right in front of your eyes with disbelief and amazement, and the thoughts running through your mind with dropped jaws, standing in an awkward position which reflected your feelings. Some of you with your hands on your heads, ready to scream, "It's not true. I don't believe it. How can this happen?" And in the same vein, I am sure there were others thinking and saying to themselves, "It's a good thing it has happened, as we can get our country, the great British Empire, back, and a slap in the face of those Americans who are ruled by their straitjacketed system. Now, try this loose cannon who seems to be the people's man, Trump." So it happened. I don't think at the time any of us in the immediate vicinity of the events expressing itself in real time ever had a passing thought about how this was going to affect our dear country Ghana, and for that matter, Africa as a whole, especially with the kind of dependency culture we this side of the world have of these two great nations, right from what we eat. Dare I say, and forgive me, the second-hand bras and pants that our less fortunate Ghanaians wear, the CFC old second-hand fridges that litter our roadsides and markets, the imported frozen dead poultry that we consume in thousands to the detriment of our own homegrown poultry, and our taste buds that have been westernized to eat the so-called perfumed rice at the expense of our own delicious delicacies. Can I be mischievous and sarcastic to describe this as the informal Brexit that has been going on throughout Africa all these years? And now the British have been brave enough to formalize this institution? Or is there a real concern that business leaders and politicians in sub-Saharan Africa should take heed and plan their economies in such a way that the impact of these decisions will not create hardship to our businesses and people? Drawing away from the informal Brexit, which can be associated with its own social and economic impacts, what were some of the impacts the morning after the formal Brexit decision? After 42 years of being an irritant member of the EU family, the United Kingdom had voted enough is enough and no longer wanted to be part of that family and sought their divorce from it. and has been the major change on the European economy and political landscape since the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. And its economic implications can be described as seismic. By 6:30 a.m. on 24th June, less than 12 hours after the referendum on Brexit, South Africa's currency, the rand, took the first blow. It plunged by almost 8% against the US dollar. Brexit sent shockwaves through the global markets, including those of Africa, and trillions of dollars wiped off the stock markets in less than a week after the decision. Investors in African markets panicked because many economies such as Angola, Ghana, Nigeria, South Africa, and Zambia were already reeling from low commodity prices exacerbated by a sluggish global demand. In these countries, Brexit added salt and pepper to their wounds of injured economies. However, months up to the lead of the referendum of Brexit, I was in the UK, and a lot of discussions went on television and radio, talking about the effects of either the yes or no vote winning and its impact on the UK-EU global economy. Ironically, although the UK has several major trading partners in sub-Saharan Africa, I did not hear anywhere in these discussions, which in some cases were hotly debated, a discussion on even mention of any effects it might have on sub-Saharan Africa economies, and hence was not part of the narrative or concern regarding its impact on Africa. Was this deliberate? Or we just didn't figure in the equation because of our own handling of our economies and the kind of weak impact it had on the global economy on the whole? Nonetheless, it is also a testament to the close ties between the UK and Africa that UK's ability to successfully steer the Brexit course could have wide repercussions in Anglophone countries in particular. The jury is out. The jury is out, though, as some see this as a short-term consequence and are of the opinion that the UK's withdrawal from the EU could be a blessing in disguise and beneficial to many African countries, especially the Anglophone-speaking nations. In fact, the UK's Minister for Africa noted, and I quote, "Brexit would only serve to strengthen relations between the UK and Africa." Let's try and inquire into this quotation. And if I may ask, how many of we CEOs here present envisage this strengthening of relations to be equally yoked? And for me, there lies the conundrum. At least with Europe, we would have the choice to trade with those countries who recognize our strength and potential and are prepared to give us a fair deal, as compared to working with only a sole country, the UK. And if we don't like the medicine the UK doles out to us, because our economy might be restrained, we are forced to swallow the bitter pill. Allow me not to sound too negative, because equally, the UK did defend African interest in trade, amongst other policy areas during its membership of the EU. And in particular, it adopted an anti-protectionist position in respect of EU agricultural policy, where such a policy favored European farmers, especially with their subsidies to the detriment of African developing countries, since existing tariffs imposed on goods such as processed coffee and cocoa were high, and it was a general belief by reformers who made the argument that it prevented their African counterparts from leveling the playing field with their European colleagues. Consequently, it is envisioned that because Brexit releases the UK from the shackles of EU regulation and red tape, it now gives them the opportunity and a free hand to negotiate better deals with African nations. And for that matter, Ghanaian businesses will also benefit from such prospects. The sting, however, is in the tail with regards to this assertion, as heard in the comment of the new British Prime Minister, Theresa May, who has not yet addressed this issue directly, but has commented to retaining an open mind with respect to the UK's business dealings and trading relationships post-Brexit. So then, I ask myself, What is so difficult as to make a commitment, especially where there is at the moment a tug of war between the EU and UK on trade, where one would have thought that the UK desperately needing to start their soliciting for trading partners like yesterday would court Africa, and more so when Africa has always been a lucrative market for them since the days of the slave trade. So why the delay in making such a commitment? Now, come with me to the migration portal of Brexit and its implications. Mostly in Africa and Ghana, when we talk about some of the major activities that can affect us through Brexit, we tend not to consider migration, but it is one of the growth pole areas in terms of remittances from our brothers and sisters living in the diaspora. It's currently estimated that there are 900,000 Africans living in the UK, of which 94,000 are of Ghanaian origin, including British Ghanaians. In a study by Sheffield University Social and Spatial Equalities Research Group, it was found that 64% of new immigrants from Ghana were employed in the UK, of which 17% and 3% were low and high income earners respectively. Remittances to family and friends in Ghana form an important part of the country's economy, and it is estimated by the World Bank that Ghanaian migrants in the diaspora remitted $2 billion in 2014, equivalent to 5.4% of 2014's GDP. In the same year, Ghanaians faced the second largest decrease in work visa grants to the UK after Nigeria. And in terms of skilled Ghanaians, a total of 627 work visas were granted in 2014, 306 less than the year before. Now, stay with me on this, since as CEOs, Brexit can have a detrimental effect on our workforce. The same trend was observed with visitors' visas, where in the same year, it decreased by 14%. There was a reason for these decreases, and this was because of the availability of similar skilled labor from other EU countries, given the free movement of labor under EU rules, as well as strict curbs imposed to control net migration. Therefore, what are the effects and implications of migration on a post-Brexit Ghana and Africa in general? And this is where I stated earlier to stay with me. During the numerous discussions that went on during Brexit, the Leave campaigners, when asked about how they will handle migration, proposed an Australian-style point system to be applied for immigration to all migrant workers. And here in Ghana, we are all aware of the phrase, going to seek for greener pastures, which seems to be ingrained in the mindset of our youth like indelible ink. And so stands to reason that we could potentially see more of our skilled and brilliant workforce relocating to the UK to fill the void that will be created by the exit of the EU workers. If such a situation does occur, where does that leave Ghanaian companies, especially those who depend on skilled labor for the operations, and those various companies who have spent time, money, and effort to train their workforce to an appreciable international standard, and these workers decide to just up and leave? This could be devastating for businesses, since they'll now be competing with the UK in terms of offering salaries that they cannot afford, compared to what these skilled workers will be paid in the UK, even if we were to only compare the strength of the British sterling to the Ghana cedi with the volatile exchange rate challenges, let alone comparing the quantum of money earned. And this can hit our service and professional sectors, which has contributed very well to our GDP in the last few years. On remittances, this can be described as a double-edged sword. And why do I say this? In the short term of Brexit, Ghanaians with relatives in the UK who remitted money regularly to their relatives in Ghana may have to make do with receiving small amounts as the value of sterling falls, and hence the source remittant in the UK will have to top up to maintain the same cedi equivalent. And this may discourage those people remitting not prepared to make that top up, which will reduce this valuable source of revenue into the economy. Example, £50 sterling on 22nd June 2016 gave 285 cedis by. By 2014, By June 2014, the same year, the same £50 was 265. The converse of the sword is that if sterling retains its value in the long term occasioned by an unemployment boom in the UK, then Ghana may potentially benefit from Brexit with increased remittance flows. Is my time up? 3 minutes. I'm not even halfway through. The direct impact of a falling British pound sterling could make imports into Ghana relatively cheaper, whereas Ghanaian exports to the UK could earn less in Ghana's cedi terms, all things being equal, although there exists a complex interrelationship between a nation's imports and exports, and its exchange rate. The latter has an effect on the trade surplus or deficit, which in turn affects the balance of payments, inflation, and inflation expectations. If that is the case, I'm going to skip China. But I need to speak the CEOs. So give me the chance to skip China, and probably in our panel discussion, I would bring some of the things up. I want to speak to them first, if you don't mind. Do you want to go for lunch now? I told you. Why did you put me on the last leg? You really want to go for lunch? You really don't want to listen to what I'm saying? So you wouldn't want me to talk to you before you leave? Let me talk to you, then when you go to lunch, you think of what I said to you, and then we take the discussion. Yes? Is that fair? Hang go, hang come. I'll do 5 minutes. I'll try as much as possible to run through. Right. I have traveled supersonic to China, didn't say anything to the Chinese, and taken an Uber taxi, driverless taxi back into Ghana. I am passionate and emotional about Ghana the way a man compares his love for a woman of his choice, and will go to all extent and extremes to please her and make her his forever wife. And I'm sure all of you here share this sentiment. Otherwise, you won't leave your busy schedules and be part of this summit. Can I now inquire from us as CEOs, really, what is it we are doing to be heard by our government? Do we have a voice? And if we do, are we using it to the benefit of fighting for what is right for us in the private sector? And how many companies here present are members of the AGI? If not, why? Because they can become a very strong advocate on our behalf. And although they are trying, a lot more companies joining will make it stronger, better, and much more effective. We sometimes seem to be cowed by politicians because we don't want to rock the boat of our comfort zone. And our voices are only heard in forums of this nature. Yesterday, the senior minister was here, and he spoke about quite a number of issues and seemed to be throwing the gauntlet at us CEOs in the private sector to run with the new dawn of government and the private sector alliance. Good thing, I must say. But apart from Citizen Kofi pleading with him to look at some aspects of the economy that hindered the private sector, I didn't hear anything else from our panel discussions about fishing deeper into some of the laudable projects suggested by this government. The central one being the One District, One Factory program. Very fantastic idea. But have we really, as CEOs, questioned as to how it will work, time frames, how these will be chosen per district, and really, how many of the CEOs have been invited by government to sit around the table to fashion this program? Maybe it has happened, but I'm not aware. So correct me if I'm wrong. I dare say the future of this country through the private sector is paramount, but not if we keep doing the things the same old way. We must know that those from Brexit, the Chinese, and Donald Trump all have permanent interest and no permanent friends, and are coming in here to better their nations and not ours. We, as captains of industry, should be brave and bold, holding government to account, and questioning those practices that don't bode well in creating a conducive atmosphere for business. When they go and sign treaties that affect our businesses, we should demand that we are part and parcel of the process of negotiations, because they are politicians and we are business people responsible for the cradle of employment. I don't think it is fair on us, where we don't have a say in such discussions, but are expected to act in creating employment. For instance, this 10-year tax-free holiday that has been proposed by the GIPC for foreign multinationals, were we consulted for our input? We need the right environment to build capacity and to use the capacity built. As our presidents go on their trips on behalf of the country, how many of our business people are invited to accompany them so that we can facilitate business with other counterparts, and such should not be politicized in any way. If government chooses to do so, it should cut across board with no party affiliation. No CEO here can put his or her hand on her chest and say all is well. The most we can say is that it's in God's hands. But I tell you, God expects us to act the way Jeremiah in the Bible acted in building the wall of Jericho. And it is only then that the good Lord would add his bit. We need to be heard. All CEOs here should be prepared to work with the media in discussing business in Ghana, and should not be afraid to speak their mind, as a favorite illustrious son of Ghana intimated, fighting for independence, that the secret of life is to have no fear. If you forgive me, I should have touched on the election of President Trump and its impact on business, but we will do that later. In conclusion, from my introduction, looking at our current economic position, there is hope that we can get it right irrespective of the challenges in the economy and with the unknowns surrounding Brexit. This should encourage us secure closer ties with other trading partners, more so build on ECOWAS, especially with a population of over 400 million within the region. We see a ready market, and then extend into wider Africa. But to do the latter, we should strengthen the AU, which will pull us all together, especially with Africa having 75% of the world's natural resources. And when it comes to negotiating new trade deals with Brexit Britain, we have the chance to negotiate equitable deals that will be of benefit to us, building our nation towards having a strong economy. It is not only a question of leadership, as was intimated yesterday, but we need strong planning and setting our priorities right, which will make us attractive and relevant to also invest in other nations. For planning, get involved as CEOs in the National Development Plan that is being drafted. Ask the questions and understand it, and make your views heard, and dialogue with government if they choose to abrogate it, especially those parts of the plan that affect business. And go ahead and get explanation from the NDPC on aspects you don't agree with. I believe it's through long-term planning we can make effective headway with investing the country's revenues prudently. We have to get to a point in Ghana and Africa where such shocks don't rattle us to the core, but swings along with us the way it does any other strong economy. And I am emboldened to say it starts with us here. Thank you for listening. God bless you.
And ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for Mr. Kwame Jantua, speaking so passionately about the business impact of Donald Trump, Brexit, China's economy on Ghana's private sector. And he speaks with the passion of a minister of the gospel, so smooth and articulate. But ladies and gentlemen, this provides enough fodder for the next discussion that we're going to have right now. I know we all love our country, we love our businesses, we love the economy, but there's no greater love than the love of food. To this end, we shall all go for lunch. Lunch is in two venues, one just behind this wall and one upstairs. You can please check your pouches and you'll see the cheats that will give you access to any of the two venues. We shall reconvene here in the next 30 minutes. But ladies and gentlemen, tonight you're not going to make this place out, because the gala dinner is something you don't want to miss for all the rice in China or the we in Jamaica. Ladies and gentlemen, bon appetit, enjoy your meals, and I'll see you in the next 30 minutes. Thank you.